Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sarah Rosenfarb, and on behalf of the whole Mapic team, I'd like to thank you to be here for the final keynote of this year's event. I hope the past few days have been profitable for your business, and I have the pleasure to welcome James Brown, which is the head of the EMA Retail Research and Consulting at Johnson LaSalle. James Brown coordinates and develops all retail research and clients' consulting needs, providing with invaluable insight and strategic advice on the state of the market. Today, he's going to share, and I know he worked tough. What I heard was that he's going to share his invaluable insight with us. And I would like you to join me to welcome him as a keynote, Mr. James Brown, and I hope you're feeling good. Yeah. And I'll let you know. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And congratulations to you all for still being here and persevering throughout the whole duration of this Mapic conference. I'd like to say, first and foremost, thank you to the organisers for asking me to speak at this final session. It's a real honour. And it's been fascinating for me throughout the period of Mapic this year, attending as many of the speaking sessions and panel sessions as I have physically been able to do in order to try and gather information on themes and different issues that are affecting the retail landscape. It will be impossible for me to touch upon all of the different themes, issues, and opportunities that have been discussed over the last few days, but I hope over the period of the next 30 minutes or so, I'll be able to give you a flavour from my perspective as to what's happening within our market. What I'd like to do firstly is just set the scene, just where we are today, what's happening. I'd then like to look forward and discuss some of the changes that are here today that are likely to shape our retail landscape moving forward from now to 2020. I intend to keep it quite light, and I don't want to keep you too long because I appreciate there's the lure of either getting back home or going out and enjoying the rest of the south of France for the weekend. So where are we today? I'd like to set the scene. And having said I wanted to keep it light, I thought I'd start on Eurozone debt crisis. But all I want to say on this is that we cannot not mention this at the moment. It is fundamental. And what happens in the Eurozone over the coming months will shape a lot of what we do over the coming years. Volatility and uncertainty, and what's the outcome likely to be? Is it going to be my scenario one, which I've got a 20% probability alongside, which is a strong bounce back? And under that scenario, what we see is a swift resolution to the Eurozone debt crisis, and driven by the corporate sector, we see a strong bounce back to economic growth. That's my scenario one. And I would love to end the conference on that note. But unfortunately, there is a stronger probability that we will see a central scenario whereby we simply muddle through. And sometime during 2012, we will be forced, or governments will be forced, and countries will be forced to resolve the Eurozone debt crisis. Under that scenario, we're likely to see the Eurozone slipping into some form of double dip recession early part of next year before recovering at the back end of next year, early 2013. And that at the moment is my central scenario as we stand here today. So a 70% probability of either resolving it swiftly or at least resolving it. And I guess the scenario three, which I really don't want to dwell on at all, is the downside scenario, which is a complete disorderly breakdown of the Eurozone. But for now, let's just concentrate on the positives and assume that it will be resolved. Now, the reason why that's so important from my perspective is because what happens there influences retail dramatically. Now, this is consumer and retail trade confidence. Now, I can guarantee that I haven't got 45 minutes of charts, so please just bear with me for one or two of them. This grey line here shows retail trade confidence since April 2000, and the red bar is consumer confidence over the same period. And as you can see, when we went into we had the global economic crisis, we plummeted in confidence hit an all-time low. Since that point, both consumer confidence and retail confidence has bounced back, but because of the current Eurozone crisis, obviously that's tailing off again, and we are seeing a deterioration in both retailer and consumer confidence across Europe. That, of course, will impact on retail and retail sales across the Eurozone. I think the caveat to that is there are huge differences when we look at it on a country-by-country basis. And within the Nordics and within Germany, confidence is far stronger and indeed at or around what we'd expect for long-term trend, whereas in some Club Med countries, obviously the confidence has waned greater than that. So in terms of how that then pans out in terms of retail sales growth from here on, and underpinned by GDP growth, this chart shows in the red bars retail sales growth per annum, average from 2011 to 2013, and the grey bars show GDP growth. So as you can see on the far left there, we've got places like Russia, unsurprisingly, Poland, Romania, the Czech Republic are forecast to see relatively strong retail sales growth from here to 2013, whereas at this end, Portugal, Spain, the Club Meds, as I mentioned earlier, are struggling and actually seeing real sales, retail sales decline over that same period. There's a number of things to pick out on this chart. One is that you can see that in a number of instances, if not the majority of them, economic growth outpaces retail sales growth. And really what that does emphasize, and it's been discussed at great length throughout the conference here, is downward pressure on disposable income, and that, in effect, directly influencing the outlook for retail sales in a number of debt-burdened economies. The other thing to point out is, on this, it masks what's happening in country. And one of the themes that has come across this Mapic is the need for us to look at a more granular level, at cities, rather than looking at country level for opportunities. It would be wrong of us to dismiss opportunities in these markets simply because of what the macro picture looks like within those countries. And certainly within some of these countries, there are some pockets of real strength and local markets which have very strong fundamentals and where opportunities still and will continue to exist. It's perhaps not unsurprising, and I'll come on to this later, that our retailers that we've seen at Mapic, and we've heard them all talking about expansion plans, a large number of them talking about the opportunities in Russia, in Poland, and in Turkey, which unfortunately I wasn't able to include in this chart because of the data provider not covering the Turkish market. But those markets are forecast to see strong retail sales growth and have strong fundamentals, and of course are very attractive to expanding retailers. We have a very constrained development pipeline, and that's another sort of theme that's been discussed at great length over the last few days. This is the existing stock for European countries in grey, and the pipeline for the end of this year and for next year in red. And as you can see from this, there is very little new supply of shopping centres in the pipeline, and that is really unlikely to change any time in the near future. We see that there is still relatively healthy supply of new schemes coming online in both Turkey and Russia. But with those two exceptions, there is not a great deal of new space coming on to our retail landscapes across Europe. With the lack of development finance and the lack of any of that coming back anytime soon, it's also unlikely that we're going to see a dramatic change to that profile over the next short term. The upside, of course, with this profile of new space is that the absence of new space is supporting rents in those key cities across Europe. And again, another thing that's been spoken about in great detail, the focus on cities. Retailers, investors, and developers that we have spoken to and that we've listened to throughout Mapic have very much spoken about targeting, being very specific about targeting key cities across Europe with very strong fundamentals. And as such, we can see that if we're looking at prime shopping centre rents, and I'm emphasising the prime, we're forecasting to see some very strong rental growth in Russia, the Czech Republic, and Turkey between now and 2013. And that being said, with the exceptions of one or two markets in the PIGS, we're still seeing some relatively strong or healthy growth, rental growth, between now and 2013 throughout the rest of Western Europe. But the emphasis is that is in prime locations, and that currently is where the demand is from retailers, certainly also from investors. Outside of prime, obviously the picture is less rosy for some secondary and certainly tertiary locations. In terms of pan-European investment, you'll be pleased to know that in the year to date, shopping centre and retail warehousing investment volumes have, to the end of quarter 3, 2011, reached 20 billion euros. That figure here is split between 7 billion euros invested in the UK and the remaining 13.3 billion invested in the rest of Europe. Now, that investment activity is on a par with what we saw in the full year of 2010. It's way beyond what we saw in 2009, 2008, and is exceeding, or is likely to exceed, what we saw in 2004. That has been fueled primarily by investment in prime shopping centre stock, prime retail warehousing, and fueled by depth of equity rather than availability of debt. And I think that's another important theme that's come through over the last few days, which is that lack of availability of debt in the investment market. We are still forecasting a year-end outturn for investment volumes for all of Europe at or around 28 billion euros. Again, that would represent a significant uplift on last year and previous years. Although with the uncertainty in the Eurozone and the debt crisis, there is an element of wait and see amongst some investors. So where have those capital flows gone throughout Europe? Well, core markets, core liquid and perceived stable markets, in relative terms, of Germany and the UK attracted a large proportion of those capital flows in the year to date. But more recently, we've seen investors shift their emphasis in looking at other geographies. So we've seen investment appetite increasing in the Czech Republic, in Poland in particular, another strong growth market, in Russia more recently, and also in investor sites, Turkey, which to date has not necessarily been a beneficiary of those capital flows to date, but in due course is likely to be in investor focus. And then finally, in terms of where we are to date, just a quick overview of where we are with investment yields. If we look at these bars here, these bars show where yields were before the global economic crisis, where they were towards the end of the crisis, which shows the yield compression, and the red bar shows where current prime shopping centre yields are today. So for the majority of countries, we've seen a sort of stabilisation of yields. They've moved in from where they were at the height of the crisis. They're still not at sort of peak levels, not unsurprisingly, but there are some exceptions to that, as you can see on the chart. So just to recap where we are today and to set the scene, there is huge economic uncertainty. We see that our European consumers and retailers are both under significant pressure. Retail sales outlook generally across Europe is weak, and access to debt still remains very challenging. And we've heard since we've been here in Cannes that banks have temporarily suspended lending to commercial real estate, and there is uncertainty about lending and when that's going to come back. But it is not all bad, and I don't want to leave you feeling all gloomy, because there are some great growth hotspots throughout Europe. And whether that's at country level, whether we're looking at Poland, whether we're looking at Turkey, whether we're looking at Russia, the Nordics, I could go on, or whether we're looking in city, whether it's the Munichs, whether it's the Hamburgs, Milan, there are pockets of growth with strong fundamentals across Europe, and within that, pockets of opportunity. It's reassuring also to hear, and having heard a lot from retailers since we've been here, Marks & Spencer's, MediaMarkt, Clarks, and a number of others, that retailers are still expanding and looking to expand and shift their focus into new markets to capitalize upon growth. There are developments, albeit not many. Investment activity to date, as I've just shown you, has been healthy and hopefully will continue, but there'll be a focus on prime assets. Again, that's been supported by this depth of equity that's out there, and long may it last, albeit it's not going to bridge the gap where debt is unavailable. And the other thing which I think is important to note is that in 2007, when we all went into a global economic crisis, we were not aware of the challenges that were ahead of us. Whereas now we are very clear, it's very clear where those challenges are, and hopefully we can position ourselves to mitigate risk, whilst obviously maximising on the opportunities that exist across Europe. So, when do we get back to normal? What next? And what will normal look like? Now, I've included this screen grab of a website on there, just really as an introduction. Back in 2010, we did some extensive work looking forward 10 years to see what the key influences are in the retail and retail property markets that will shape our markets between now and 2020. And that program was called Retail 2020, and that's the website where we post the findings of that initial research. And I've spent a lot of this year with the market, colleagues and clients, discussing about this change to try and shape and sort of fine-tune our thoughts on the key influencing factors that will shape our markets. And the key themes, really, that we identified in that program of research was sort of the pace of economic growth, the fact that in the Eurozone we are going to see weak economic growth from here on, and that is going to act as a headwind towards the retail and retail property sector. There's also the shift in emphasis of economic and financial growth and the power from west to east. We've seen the likes of India and China growing, supporting luxury brands as they expand, and various other retailers now they're looking further afield for expansion opportunities because there are far greater growth stories elsewhere in the world. We touch upon going old and demographic change and the extent to which aging and shrinking populations is going to impact on the retail sector. We touch upon, in great detail, going digital, and I'll come on to that in a second, and the evolution and influence of technology. We talk about going beyond retail, and this is about experience. And again, this is something that's been spoken about a lot over the last few days. And then finally, within our sort of 2020 report, going green, which talks about the increasing importance of the green agenda. Now, I'm not going to take you through all of those. They're available for you to have a look at your own time if you haven't seen it already, available to download on the website. But the reason I sort of use those as a sort of an introduction to my next bit is because what has surprised me and what's surprised us is within the year of that report being published, a lot has changed. And we've seen a real acceleration in change in certain aspects. Now, this is a toad. And the reason I have a toad there is that there's a tail that we have picked up on, which I quite like, which is, if you drop a toad in boiling water, it will automatically jump out. Whereas if you put a toad in cold water and slowly heat it up, it does not see the change in temperature and eventually will die. Now, there's three important points to point out. One, I haven't tried it, so don't think that I've been cruel to toads. Two, I wouldn't recommend you try it. But the reason I've given you that tale is I see we are in this position at the moment in our sector. Change is around us, and some of that change is structural change, not cyclical change. And we absolutely need to adapt to change in order for us to be prepared for what is coming. Now, in light of that, and in light of having seen acceleration in certain areas of change and the influences on our sector, we've recently published Chapter 9 in our series of Retail 2020. And if you'd like to have a copy of it, there's a copy here for you to take at the end. What Chapter 9 talks about is the response. What do we need to do in order to adapt or change what we do to respond to this change which is upon us today? So change is here. It's not coming, it is here. And we've heard that through a number of people that have spoken here throughout the conference. The water is bubbling around us, and the question is, are we ready to jump? Or are we just going to sit and accept the consequences? Now, within our Chapter 9, we talk about a new rule book, a new retail rule book, having to rewrite the rules for the retail and retail property sector going forward. And I'm just going to touch upon one or two of the key influencing facts that I think are going to be significant going forward. It won't be surprising that my headline is technology and moving digital. Now, in my mind, this is the biggest game changer. Aside from sort of current economic uncertainty and volatility, for me, this is the game changer that will change our retail and retail property landscapes going forward. And it is accelerating at an alarming rate. This morning, I had an app that woke me up at the right time in my sleep cycle. I checked Bloomberg on an app. I checked the weather in London so I could see what it would be like when I went back. I looked at the Mapic app to have a look at the sequencing of events this morning in different sessions. There are endless opportunities for us to use technology to make our lives more convenient. We spoke this morning, I heard this morning about the need for technology to improve service within retail and retail environments. And we need to get up to speed with this because this is happening, it's happening and accelerating at an alarming rate. It's providing information, it's providing transparency, the ability to compare pricing when in retail stores, either by Googling or by using barcode scanners, giving that real-time power to the consumer. It's giving us immediate accessibility to information and to product. We can download music, books, software, and that will have an impact on those sectors. It's giving us flexibility. But we've also heard from retailers that it should be seen, especially online retail, as complementary to offline retail. It should be seen, the e-commerce should be seen as fully integrated part of a retailer's business strategy. And we heard that loud and clear from Clarks, we've heard it from MediaMarkt, Marks and Spencer's and other retailers here throughout the conference. It shouldn't compete, it should be complementary. And we've heard some great examples of retailers that actually use online to drive traffic into physical stores. We do think going forward, and I think that's probably conservative, that over 50% of all retail transactions in the not too distant future will be digitally influenced. Whether or not we've sourced the product and bought it, whether we've bought it online and collected it in store, whether we've simply looked for consumer reviews on products, or we've looked at comparing pricing, they will somehow, if not more than 50, maybe 3/4 of all transactions in non-food will be digitally influenced. How landlords operate in this arena remains to be seen. Retailers are clearly redefining formats and strategies to accommodate this true fully integrated multi-channel model. Landlords, it's a slightly more difficult arena for them to operate in, as they ultimately are not the end sellers of merchandise. That being said, if you look at Westfield in Australia, they have a fully functioning e-commerce website selling retailer products from within their centres. So this is where it's all moving. The next key area that we've spoken about within the research that we have done, and again, it's been talked about in great detail here, and this comes again, touches upon technology, is marketing and the need to improve marketing. The reason for that is we're obviously in a far more competitive environment than we've been in for many years, and there will be huge competition to compete for disposable income, which is already under pressure. Get them and keep them in this more and more fickle retail environment. Now, we do that through, I think we need to change the way in which we market, and we've seen examples here of digital marketing. The old way of marketing to customers is no longer fit for purpose. And the use of technology in particular in order for us to communicate with our end consumers and to gather data is going to increase in importance. The question to you all, I guess, is do we have the mindset to change? Have we recognized that we need to change? And if so, do we have the skill sets? A lot of this technology-driven change is being driven by the younger generation, and everyone else, including myself, we are catching up. But those people at the moment involved in retail and retail property have the skill sets or the mindsets to adapt in order to respond to what's happening. I explained to my daughters that when my parents were younger, computers did not exist. There was no computers. There were no iPads, laptops, iTouches or anything. And my children both looked at me bemused, completely confused. And my youngest daughter said to me, "How did they get on the internet?" And that just shows the mentality. My children, are natives to technology. They're born with it. They understand it. And they will fuel this change. So we need to make sure in the retail arena and in the sort of investor, developer and landlord arena, we have the right skill sets to help us adapt to change. And that goes just beyond, technology. Another key area which has been discussed at great length over the last few days is this issue of going beyond retail. Retail has to be more than a simple transaction. Over the last 10 years or so, the retail market has been characterized by people wanting more product. It's about squeezing prices and getting more for your buck and getting volume purchases, getting as much fashion as you can, almost to the point where fashion has become disposable fashion. I think we've come to a point now where that's changing, and I think people now want better. So if the last 10 years were about people wanting more, the next 10 years are about people wanting better. And by better, I mean a more fulfilling experience. I don't necessarily mean better product. It might be better product, but it's also about enjoying the experience that you have when you go shopping. Because at the end of the day, it's that experience that you can provide in the physical environment that competes and gives something that the online offer cannot. Consumers will want both online and offline, but when they go offline into traditional retail environments, they'll want to enjoy it and have a fulfilling experience. And part of that will be experience in store, part of that will be with customer service and how you're dealt with as a customer, and part of that will be due to the environment and the tenant mix and the offer that surrounds you. So it'll be important to have the right balance within major shopping centres of sort of leisure, catering, cinemas perhaps, and other things and other uses that will want us to go there to spend time. Clearly, not every centre in Europe and throughout the world can provide that level of experience and that wow factor to compete for our spend. So there is another alternative, which is if you can't provide the experience to compete, then at least provide the true convenience in order to get people to come and shop in your centre. The danger, I think, is that if you neither provide the experience or the convenience, and if you're in the wake of a better offer, then the outlook is bleak. One of the other key things that's happening in the retail market at the moment is that the occupiers, the retailers, are changing their requirements in response to changes in consumer and retail markets. Now, there is a general acknowledgement, and we've heard this mantra from a number of retailers, that the customer has to be at the heart of everything. And I think for the first time since I've been involved in this sector, I think the customer is at last king. What the customer wants, the customer will have to get in order for us to compete for their disposable income. Retailers are having to adapt, change, look at new formats and new strategies that, as we've discussed, have a fully integrated multi-channel capacity. We've seen new formats emerging, and it's been discussed here. Amazon taking drop points or collect points within shopping centres so that you can buy your products at Amazon, but rather than having to get home to collect it, you go through the mall, you open your locker, and there's your merchandise waiting for you on your way home. Again, a new format, a new strategy combining online with traditional retailing. We're also seeing some retailers, and in the UK we've seen this, one of our biggest department store operators, House of Fraser, taking very small units in high streets throughout the UK, simply as a click and collect format. It's arguable, I think, in more mature, saturated retail markets, and with that I sort of talk about the UK, that we have, that retailers perhaps have too many stores, and that with the new sort of multi-channel model, and with fewer, perhaps bigger, dominant experiential centres, some of our retailers have too much space. And the space that we have is perhaps no longer, or some of the space we have is perhaps no longer fit for purpose. And I'd estimate that in the UK, perhaps up to 30% of space, as is today, is no longer fit for future retail requirements. Now, some of that can be adapted and changed to meet future requirements, but it's something that needs to be looked at. So retailers appear to be looking for fewer stores, perhaps in fewer locations, and also being looking further afield outside of just the current markets in which they operate, and I'll come on to that in a second. So within these mature markets, and I use UK as an example, retailers need to rationalise their existing portfolios and work out what their portfolio looks like going forward. Do they need to reduce the number of stores, increase the number of large stores, or they need to thoroughly look at those portfolios to make them fit for the future? Retailers are also more and more looking at cross-border activity, more than ever. Retailers, we've seen a significant influx of US retailers coming to Europe in recent years. We've seen domestic retailers in the Eurozone moving cross-border, and the activity has been quite significant, and something, again, which was picked up in one of the sessions yesterday. Retailers are expanding for a number of reasons. One, because their peers are doing it, and they see that they can do it in a truly global market. Two, because they can capitalize upon growth in other markets where within their domestic environments growth is weak, and hence we've seen the attraction of people wanting to move off to China, India, Brazil, or even closer to home, to Turkey and to Russia, to Poland and other markets where there are great growth opportunities. But they also do it, as Marks and Spencer's identified yesterday, to reduce the dependency on one market. Marks and Spencer's have a large business, obviously, in the UK, which is forecast to see relatively weak growth over the coming years, whereas some of the markets that Marks and Spencer is now targeting will give them far greater returns over the short to medium term. So we are seeing retail occupiers now trade cross-border more so than we've ever seen before. Now, just to illustrate this, and I really don't want you to read the dots, this is just showing you, I've analysed 150 cross-border retailers across 55 key European cities. And on the x-axis along the bottom, we've got presence of international retail brands, and on the y-axis, I have market attractiveness. So on the facial presence, the city with the most of the 150 international brands is London, followed by Paris. And on the y-axis, the market attractiveness is made up of a combination of different variables, including economic growth, market size, per capita spend, and so forth. What you can see here is that there are some mature markets up here that already have quite a lot of presence from the international retail arena. In this area here, you've got some very attractive markets, Germany, the Nordics, and some UK cities, and some cities elsewhere across Europe that are very attractive in terms of outlook, market size, per capita spend. But at present, their international brand presence is relatively weak. So from an expanding retailer's point of view, and if you're looking at strong city fundamentals, these are the cities that should be on the radar over the next 5 years for expansion. And it's looking at this granular level that's becoming ever more important. From an investor perspective, and on that note, we can't just look at countries, we need to look at cities. And within these countries, there will be some fantastic opportunities going forward for the right investors. Clearly, for those investors looking to invest in real estate, shopping centres, retail warehousing, or other retail real estate, they'll be looking, if they're looking for growth, they'll be looking at the Nordics, they'll be looking for Poland, Russia, and Turkey. If they're looking for value, they'll be looking for the right schemes in the right cities, in the right locations, in places like Italy and Spain. And if they're looking at relative stability, they'll be looking in the core markets of the UK, France, and Germany. But again, the continued focus for the short to medium term is likely still to be on prime product by equity-rich investors. So really, just to wrap up, we are likely to see in the Eurozone a very weak, at best, and patchy retail outlook, although it's important to remember that there are some hotspots throughout Europe. And I don't just mean Russia and Turkey and Poland, I mean cities within countries across Europe. And it's identifying those hotspots which is going to become increasingly important over the coming years. The focus has to be at city and looking at city fundamentals, not at country. Technology, multi-channel, fully integrated multi-channel in the retail market is a must. It is, without shadow of a doubt, the biggest game changer that will influence retail over the coming years, and we need to respond to that. Retailers that exist, in particular those existing mature retailers in mature markets, they're going to have to really look at their portfolios and decide whether their existing portfolio is fit for purpose in this new world in which we're going into. We are unlikely to see a massive wave of new developments coming online in the majority of European markets. And as such, the supply of new space across Europe coming online is likely to remain very thin. The upside, of course, is that it supports, from a sort of investor or landlord perspective, rents in prime locations. The downside, of course, is that retailers then struggle to find the space that they want to meet their expansion plans. And then finally, investor focus, as I've said, will continue throughout Europe, but will focus on that prime product. It will look, though, investor focus will look outside of the core markets and will now start to look geographically into markets where they will get stronger returns. I think this focus on prime is another important one. At the moment, we're at a time where everything is focusing on prime, whether it's occupier expansion requirements or whether it's investors. Outside of prime at the moment, and for that secondary and tertiary product across Europe, the outlook is still very uncertain. So I guess the question to you all really, and to me and to the rest of us in the market is, are we ready to adapt to change? Because change is here. And then on that note, I wish you all a very happy weekend and a safe trip home. Thank you very much.